There comes a moment in every serious life when solitude ceases to be a shelter and begins to feel like a corridor. You have not been abandoned there, nor forgotten. You have been prepared. For a long while, you were trained to stand alone, your convictions sharpened by silence, your patience strengthened by unanswered questions, your faith refined in places where applause could not reach. You wondered why your path felt narrower than others, why your thinking grew deeper while conversations around you grew thinner. You mistook this narrowing for isolation, not realizing it was alignment. You have been called a chosen one not because you are superior, but because you were willing to be shaped, willing to be misunderstood, willing to obey truths that offered no immediate reward. A chosen life is not a comfortable one, it is a demanding one. It asks you to walk forward while clarity walks behind you. It asks you to believe that meaning exists before proof arrives. And now, after seasons of becoming, the nature of the calling begins to shift. For the first time, the task is no longer to endure alone. Every mission evolves. First, one is taught to stand, then to walk, then to discern, and finally, though many are unprepared for this stage, to recognize. The next mission placed before you is not an action, nor a conquest, nor a test of strength. It is a meeting. Not a coincidence disguised as chance, but an encounter designed with intention. You are being led toward another soul who has undergone a similar refining fire, though in a different furnace altogether. This is where many falter, for they imagine that meeting another chosen one will feel dramatic, obvious, or immediately comforting. In truth, it may feel unsettling. Two sharpened minds do not always rest easily beside one another. Two disciplined spirits can mistake recognition for resistance. When iron meets iron, sparks fly, not because the metals are enemies, but because both are strong. Strength does not repel strength, it reveals it. You may have wondered why shallow connections began to exhaust you, why conversations that once sufficed now feel hollow, why admiration without understanding leaves you restless. It is because you were not designed to walk beside everyone, nor were you meant to finish the journey in isolation. The meeting of two chosen ones is not about validation, but about responsibility. When two lives shaped by purpose intersect, the cost of distraction doubles, but so does the potential for impact. Do not assume this meeting is romantic, nor dismiss the possibility that it could be. Do not confine the mission to categories that make you comfortable. Purpose is rarely polite enough to ask permission. What matters is this: you are being prepared to recognize depth without fear, conviction without competition, strength without domination. You are being trained to meet another who will not need you to shrink, nor require you to perform. Such meetings often arrive quietly. They do not announce themselves with thunder. They enter disguised as ordinary conversations that linger longer than expected, questions that strike closer than intended, silences that feel full rather than awkward. You may feel exposed, not because you are unsafe, but because you are finally seen. And seeing, as it turns out, is far more demanding than being admired. Understand this clearly: the mission is not to merge identities, but to align directions. Two chosen ones do not erase one another, they refine one another. Each becomes a mirror, not flattering, but honest. In that honesty, pride is tested, humility is required, and growth accelerates. What once took years alone may now take months together, because truth spoken between equals travels faster. If this prospect unsettles you, that is a sign of readiness rather than fear. Comfort has never been the measure of calling. Readiness is found in the willingness to be challenged without becoming defensive, to be corrected without becoming bitter, to walk beside another without surrendering the conscience that brought you this far. You are not being asked to abandon your path, but to discover that your path was never meant to remain singular forever. Some missions are accomplished by standing firm, others by moving forward. This one is accomplished by recognition, by discerning another whose presence sharpens rather than softens your resolve, whose questions deepen rather than dilute your faith, whose strength does not threaten yours but calls it higher. The meeting itself is not the destination. It is the beginning of a different kind of obedience, one that requires courage not just to stand alone, but to walk wisely together. There is a hidden discipline in being chosen that few speak about, because it is learned not through instruction, but through endurance. Before any great alignment occurs, a person must first be stripped of illusions about themselves, about others, and about the ease of purpose. You were not merely delayed, you were being clarified. Every season where progress felt slow was a season where motives were examined. Every unanswered prayer was not a denial but a refinement, pressing you to ask whether you desired comfort or truth. This is how the foundation was laid, quietly and without spectacle, many mistake being chosen for being spared. But the opposite is often true. You were allowed to struggle precisely because struggle teaches discernment. You learned the difference between noise and meaning, between approval and conviction. While others collected companions easily, you learned to walk carefully. While others spoke freely, you learned the weight of words. This was not punishment, it was preparation. A shallow soul cannot recognize depth, and a hurried heart cannot sustain purpose. At this stage, the mission shifts inward before it ever moves outward. You are being asked to examine not your strength, but your readiness to share it. Strength kept hoarded becomes brittle. Strength shared wisely becomes enduring. The solitude you once resented has trained you to listen, to yourself, to truth, to the quiet warnings that precede wisdom. Now you are being prepared for a test more subtle than isolation, partnership without dependence, connection without compromise. The meeting ahead will not reward performance. Masks will be useless there. Whatever you have been pretending to be will tire quickly in the presence of someone who has also endured the long work of becoming. This is why the preparation was so thorough. You are being ready to show up whole, not impressive, honest, not invulnerable. The chosen life does not culminate in dominance but in clarity. Clarity about who you are and who you are not meant to be. It is important to understand that recognition is not always immediate. Sometimes it arrives as friction. Sometimes it comes disguised as disagreement. When two individuals shaped by conviction encounter one another, they do not rush into harmony. They test the ground. They probe assumptions. They challenge comfort. This is not conflict for its own sake, but verification. Truth welcomes examination. Falsehood fears it. If the connection endures scrutiny, it is because it rests on something sturdier than convenience. You may feel an urge to retreat when this moment approaches. Old habits will whisper that solitude is safer, that independence is purer, that reliance is weakness. These whispers are echoes of past seasons, not instructions for the present one. Independence taught you how to stand. This mission will teach you how to walk without losing balance. The aim is not to be carried, nor to carry, but to move in step, each responsible for their own footing, yet aware of the shared direction. Do not expect this alignment to solve your life. Purpose is not a remedy for effort, it is a demand for greater responsibility. When another chosen one enters your path, the margin for excuses narrows. You will be seen more clearly, and therefore held more accountable. Growth accelerates where understanding exists. What once took solitude and time may now require humility and dialogue. This is not easier work, it is deeper work. Pay attention to what awakens in you during this season. Notice whether your questions become sharper, your patience more intentional, your silence more meaningful. These are signs that preparation is active, not complete. A chosen life is never finished being shaped, it simply moves from one level of responsibility to another. The meeting itself is not the culmination. It is an invitation to a higher standard of faithfulness. Remember that purpose does not erase individuality. You are not being reduced into a role or absorbed into another's vision. You are being invited to bring your full self, disciplined, reflective, and alert, into a shared mission that requires two whole persons, rather than one fragmented one. Anything less would collapse under pressure. Anything false would fracture under truth. If you have been sensing a restlessness that feels different from dissatisfaction, pay attention. It is not the ache of lack, but the tension of readiness. The next mission is not about proving that you are chosen, that work has already been done in private. It is about recognizing when preparation meets opportunity, when solitude gives way to alignment, and when the courage to stand alone evolves into the wisdom to walk forward with another, without losing the integrity that brought you this far, there is a quiet danger in assuming that preparation ends once recognition begins. Many believe that after long seasons of refinement, the arrival of alignment signals rest. In truth, alignment is not rest, it is responsibility intensified. When another chosen one enters your path, the demands placed upon your character increase, not decrease. You are no longer shaped only by circumstance, but by relationship, and relationship has a way of exposing what solitude allowed you to manage privately. You were trained in stillness for a reason. Stillness teaches restraint. It teaches you to observe before reacting, to listen before asserting, to discern before deciding. These habits were formed not to isolate you permanently, but to prepare you for proximity without chaos. When two lives shaped by discipline draw near, the danger is not weakness, but pride disguised as certainty. Preparation now requires vigilance, not against others, but against the temptation to assume you already know. Recognition must never be confused with possession. Meeting another chosen one does not grant entitlement, control, or superiority. It demands reverence. You are encountering someone shaped by pressures you did not experience, carrying convictions you did not earn, bearing scars you did not witness. The discipline you practiced alone must now be practiced in dialogue. Humility is no longer optional. It becomes the atmosphere in which growth continues. You may notice that old methods stop working. Silence used to protect you, now it may distance you. Self-reliance once preserved clarity, now it may limit collaboration. This is not a failure of character, but a signal of transition. Every stage of calling requires the surrender of tools that were once effective but are no longer sufficient. Wisdom is not loyalty to habits, but obedience to timing. This stage will test your ability to remain truthful without becoming rigid. Conviction without compassion hardens quickly when mirrored by another strong will. The task is not to win understanding, but to cultivate it. Two chosen ones do not sharpen one another through dominance, but through precision, careful words, intentional pauses, and a shared commitment to truth over ego. When truth becomes the shared aim, disagreement no longer threatens unity, it strengthens it. There will be moments when you are tempted to compare journeys. Comparison is subtle and therefore dangerous. It turns recognition into rivalry and alignment into measurement. Remember this. Parallel paths do not require identical terrain. What matters is not how the other was formed, but whether both are willing to remain teachable. The moment teachability disappears, calling begins to decay into performance. You are being asked to expand your understanding of strength. Strength is no longer merely the ability to endure alone. It is the capacity to remain open without becoming unguarded, firm without becoming inflexible, committed without becoming possessive. This balance cannot be learned in theory. It is learned through proximity. Through moments where misunderstanding invites patience and clarity requires courage. Expect to encounter resistance within yourself before you encounter it in the other. Old fears will surface. Fear of being overshadowed, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing the identity you fought to protect. These fears do not indicate danger, they indicate exposure. Exposure is the price of meaningful alignment. Anything that matters enough to shape you will first reveal you. The mission at this stage is subtle but exacting, to build trust without haste, to extend grace without naivety, to offer truth without weaponizing it. Chosen ones are not exempt from error, they are accountable for response. How you repair misunderstandings will matter more than how you avoid them. How you listen will matter more than how eloquently you speak. Do not rush toward outcomes. Purpose unfolds at the pace required to sustain it. What is built quickly often collapses under pressure. What is built deliberately gains resilience. Allow time to test alignment, to observe consistency, to confirm that values endure beyond favorable circumstances. Patience here is not delay, it is verification. As this season progresses, you may sense an unfamiliar vulnerability. Not the vulnerability of weakness, but of responsibility shared. The weight you once carried alone is now being distributed, and that redistribution requires trust. Trust does not arrive fully formed, it is constructed through repeated faithfulness in small things. Notice how the other handles truth, handles correction, handles uncertainty. These moments reveal more than declarations ever could. Remember that the purpose of meeting another chosen one is not comfort, affirmation, or rescue. It is refinement multiplied. You are being called into a partnership that demands clarity of motive, steadiness of character, and courage to remain honest when silence would be easier. This stage will not simplify your calling, it will deepen it, asking more of your integrity, your patience, and your willingness to grow beyond what solitude could ever demand. At this point in the journey, the greatest challenge is no longer preparation or recognition, but endurance with intention. When two chosen paths begin to move in proximity, momentum increases, and with it the temptation to rely on impulse rather than wisdom. You are being asked to slow down internally even as circumstances appear to accelerate. Depth requires patience, and patience is the discipline that protects purpose from distortion. One of the quiet tests in this stage is discernment between agreement and alignment. Agreement can be reached quickly, alignment must be proven over time. Two people may agree on ideals yet differ in their willingness to live them when the cost rises. This is why observation matters more than enthusiasm. Watch how commitment behaves under inconvenience, how integrity responds to pressure, how humility survives correction. These are not judgments, they are confirmations. You may feel the urge to explain yourself more than necessary. When recognition occurs, the desire to be understood intensifies. Resist the impulse to over-clarify. Truth does not require constant defense. Those who are aligned will recognize consistency without persuasion. Those who are not will not be convinced by explanation alone. Learning when to speak and when to remain still is part of the refinement that continues in this season. Another test emerges in the form of expectation. Expectation, when unspoken, becomes a silent burden placed upon the other. When exaggerated, it becomes a standard no one can sustain. You are being asked to hold expectations with humility, to know what matters deeply while allowing room for process. Growth does not move in straight lines, and alignment does not erase human limitation. Wisdom makes room for development without lowering conviction. As proximity increases, so does visibility. Weaknesses that solitude concealed will surface, not as failures, but as opportunities for maturity. This requires restraint. The temptation will be either to correct too quickly or to avoid truth altogether. Neither serves the mission. Correction wit. Hout patience wounds, silence without honesty corrodes. The chosen path requires a third way, truth offered with care, and patience exercised without avoidance. You may notice that your sense of identity is being refined yet again. This is not loss, it is precision. When another strong presence enters your life, you are forced to distinguish between what is essential and what is habitual. Some traits you defended were survival strategies, not convictions. This stage invites you to release what no longer serves purpose, even if it once protected you. Letting go here is not compromise, it is clarity. There will be moments of tension where withdrawal seems safer than engagement. Do not confuse discomfort with danger. Growth often feels threatening to the parts of you that learn to survive in isolation. Engagement, when guided by discernment, becomes the training ground for a deeper kind of faithfulness. This does not mean constant intensity. It means intentional presence, choosing to remain attentive rather than reactive. The mission also requires that you resist the urge to idealize the other. Idealization is a subtle form of avoidance. It replaces reality with expectation and blinds you to truth. Honor the other by seeing them clearly, not by placing them on a pedestal they cannot stand upon. Real alignment thrives on honesty, not illusion. Anything sustained by fantasy will fracture under responsibility. As time unfolds, notice whether trust grows quietly. True trust does not announce itself. It appears in small freedoms, freedom to disagree without fear, freedom to admit uncertainty without losing respect, freedom to pause without pressure. These freedoms indicate alignment far more reliably than intensity or declaration. Where freedom increases, purpose has room to breathe. Remember that endurance is not passive, it is active commitment to remain faithful to principles when emotion fluctuates. Emotions are valuable indicators but unreliable guides. This season calls for a steadiness that holds course even when clarity feels momentarily obscured. You are not being asked to suppress feeling, but to anchor decision-making in truth rather than reaction. As this stage continues, the measure of progress will not be speed but depth, not how quickly things advance, but how securely they are built. Purpose does not rush what it intends to sustain. If you feel pressure to hurry, examine its source. Calling invites patience, fear demands urgency. Learn to tell the difference. Ultimately, this phase asks whether you can remain committed to the long work of alignment, work that includes misunderstanding, adjustment, and growth, without retreating into old patterns of isolation or control. You are being shaped for a form of faithfulness that extends beyond personal strength into shared responsibility. What solitude taught you about endurance, this season will teach you about perseverance together, where integrity must be chosen daily, clarity must be protected deliberately, and purpose must be honored not just in belief, but in consistent, patient action. As this journey continues, a quieter but more demanding lesson begins to surface: stewardship. Up to now, much of your strength was measured by what you could withstand. In this season, it is measured by what you are willing to protect. Alignment introduces influence, and influence requires restraint. The closer two chosen paths move together, the greater the responsibility to guard not only your own integrity, but the shared direction that is beginning to form. You may sense that your words carry more weight than before. This is not imagination. Proximity amplifies impact. A careless remark now lingers longer, a thoughtful one shapes more deeply. The discipline you practiced internally must now govern your speech. Silence, once your refuge, must be balanced with clarity. Speech, once rare, must now be measured. Every exchange becomes an opportunity either to strengthen trust or to erode it. At this stage, intention matters more than intensity. Passion without direction scatters energy, but intention gathers it. You are learning to move deliberately, to choose actions that serve purpose rather than impulse. This requires resisting the urge to react immediately. Reaction feels powerful, but it is often short-sighted. Purpose requires response, which is slower, heavier, and more enduring. You may notice that the temptation to control increases as responsibility grows. Control often disguises itself as protection, but true protection does not dominate. It preserves freedom while safeguarding direction. When two chosen ones walk together, the challenge is not who leads, but how leadership is exercised. Leadership rooted in fear tightens grip. Leadership rooted in trust creates space. This season asks you to practice the latter. Misunderstandings will still occur, but they take on a different character now. They are no longer tests of compatibility, but opportunities for stewardship. How you handle tension reveals whether alignment is being nurtured or merely tolerated. Defensiveness fractures shared purpose. Curiosity strengthens it. The question shifts from who is right to what serves truth. This shift is subtle but transformative. Another lesson emerges in the realm of patience with process. You may feel that clarity should arrive faster now that alignment has been established. Resist this expectation. Shared purpose unfolds in layers, each requiring confirmation. Rushing understanding produces false certainty, and false certainty is fragile. Allow space for questions to remain open without forcing resolution. Maturity is revealed in the ability to carry uncertainty without panic. You are also being invited to examine your relationship with power. Power, in this context, is not dominance, but influence. The ability to affect direction, mood, and momentum. Influence must be handled with care. Used carelessly, it manipulates. Used wisely, it strengthens. You are learning that the most powerful posture is often restraint, choosing not to push when you could. not to insist when you might, not to prevail at the expense of peace. This season will challenge your consistency. Anyone can act wisely when conditions are favorable. Stewardship is proven when pressure mounts, when fatigue sets in, when misunderstanding persists. The question is not whether you will feel frustration, but whether frustration will govern you. Integrity is not the absence of strain, it is faithfulness under strain. You may find yourself longing for simplicity, for the clarity of earlier seasons when the path felt solitary and straightforward. That simplicity was appropriate then. It would be insufficient now. Complexity has entered not to confuse you, but to deepen you. Shared purpose demands greater discernment because it carries greater potential. With potential comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes complexity. Guard against complacency. Alignment, once established, must be maintained. Trust is not a static achievement, it is a living practice. It grows through reliability, transparency, and humility. Neglect these, and trust weakens quietly. Attend to them, and trust strengthens even through difficulty. This maintenance is not glamorous, but it is essential. You are also learning that stewardship includes knowing when to pause. Forward movement is not always progress. Sometimes restraint is the most faithful action. Pausing allows truth to surface, motives to be examined, and direction to be clarified. Do not fear these pauses. They are not signs of failure, but of wisdom at work. As this stage unfolds, the measure of success shifts again. It is no longer about personal endurance, recognition, or even alignment. It is about faithfulness to what has been entrusted to you, the shared responsibility, the growing influence, the emerging direction. You are being shaped into someone who can carry weight without becoming heavy, who can lead without controlling, who can protect purpose without stifling growth. This lesson, though demanding, prepares you for the kind of mission that can only be fulfilled by those willing to steward, not just their own calling, but the fragile, powerful work that begins when chosen paths walk forward together. As this final stage of the keynote unfolds, the emphasis shifts from formation, alignment, endurance, and stewardship to something even more demanding, faithfulness. Why? Without visibility. By now the desire for recognition has been largely stripped away, yet the work continues with equal seriousness. This is the season where purpose must be honored, even when no immediate outcome confirms its value. You are being asked to remain steady without applause, committed without assurance, and disciplined without constant clarity. When two chosen ones walk forward together, the temptation arises to measure progress by external markers, results, approval, momentum. Resist this urge. The truest work often happens beneath the surface, where motives are purified and intentions are tested. Faithfulness that depends on visible success is fragile. Faithfulness rooted in conviction endures regardless of circumstance. This is the kind of endurance now required. You may notice that silence returns, though it feels different than before. It is no longer the silence of isolation, but of shared understanding. Words become fewer not because there is nothing to say, but because much no longer needs explanation. This silence is not emptiness, it is depth. It allows space for reflection, correction, and renewal. Learn to respect it rather than fill it unnecessarily. At this stage, you are being entrusted with influence that may never be fully acknowledged. This is not an oversight, it is protection. Influence without recognition guards against pride and preserves sincerity. What you shape quietly may outlast what others build loudly. The temptation will be to reveal, to prove, to justify. But the mission now requires discretion. Not everything meaningful must be announced to be real. You are also being taught the discipline of consistency. Consistency is not repetition. It is integrity maintained over time. It is choosing the same principles on difficult days as on inspired ones. Emotion fluctuates, motivation fades, circumstances shift, consistency remains. This steadiness is what allows shared purpose to endure beyond seasons of enthusiasm. There will be moments when the weight feels uneven, when effort appears unreciprocated, when progress seems stalled. These moments test your motives more than your strength. Ask not whether the journey feels fair, but whether your response remains faithful. Chosen lives are not measured by comfort, but by obedience to what is right even when it is costly. This stage also deepens your understanding of sacrifice. Sacrifice is not loss for its own sake. It is the willingness to release what is good in order to protect what is essential. You may need to relinquish certain expectations, timelines, or personal preferences. This is not diminishment, it is focus. Purpose narrows before it strengthens. As you move forward, remain alert to subtle distractions. Not all distractions are harmful in appearance. Some arrive disguised as opportunity, urgency, or even affirmation. Discernment now requires asking not whether something is permissible, but whether it is aligned. Alignment has become your standard, and anything that pulls attention away from it, however appealing, must be examined carefully. You will also discover that rest becomes a form of obedience. Exhaustion distorts judgment and weakens resolve. Rest does not abandon the mission, it sustains it. Learning when to pause, when to restore, and when to proceed is part of the wisdom now being cultivated. Discipline without rest hardens. Rest without discipline dissolves. Balance preserves purpose. As the keynote draws toward its deeper meaning, understand this. The goal was never the meeting itself. The meeting was a beginning. The true mission is what follows: daily faithfulness, quiet consistency, and shared resolve to walk forward without compromise. What you have been shaped for cannot be rushed, displayed, or simplified. It must be lived. If you feel that the journey remains unfinished, that is because it is. Calling does not conclude, it unfolds. Each stage prepares you for the next responsibility, not the final reward. You are not being led toward arrival, but toward continuation. The path ahead will require the same courage that sustained you alone, now refined by the wisdom to walk together. Carry this understanding with humility. Do not cling to the title of chosen. Live the discipline it requires. Let your actions remain precise, your motives clear, and your commitment steady. In doing so, you honor not only your own preparation, but the shared purpose entrusted to you, one that does not demand attention, does not seek validation, and does not announce completion, but continues forward in quiet strength, shaped by faithfulness rather than certainty, and sustained by integrity rather than outcome.